Let's talk about something that's always felt a little off in the Harry Potter universe. We see magic that can mend broken bones in a single night, or clean an entire house with just a swish and a flick. So, how on earth is it possible that some wizards are still struggling with something as fundamental as poverty? It's a massive paradox, and today, we're going to get to the bottom of it.
This is the big one, right? This is the core question. With all that power, you'd think magic would be the ultimate cheat code for life, solving hunger, unemployment, you name it. You'd think it would guarantee a decent life for everyone. But as we know, the books are just full of examples that tell a very different story.
And of course, the first family we all think of is the Weasleys. Their constant struggle, the hand-me-down robes, the financial stress, it's a huge part of their story. When Harry first sees their vault at Gringotts, this quote just says it all. It's such a powerful image of a family that's barely scraping by, which is just so strange when you remember they are a family of incredibly talented witches and wizards.
But it's not just the Weasleys. Remus Lupin's situation is honestly even more dire. His shabby clothes, his exhausted look, it tells a story of real, grinding hardship. You know, when he gets to Hogwarts, he finally looks healthier, like he's actually getting regular meals for the first time in who knows how long. So this really deepens the mystery. What is going on in this world?
So let's call this what it is, the poverty paradox. And like any good mystery, the only way to solve it is to follow the clues. Our investigation is going to start with the most basic piece of the puzzle, the actual structure of the wizarding world.
Okay, so our first clue is kind of surprising because it's so normal. You see, for all its magic and wonder, the wizarding world runs on a pretty familiar economic system. It seems like magic can change how you do things, but it doesn't get rid of the basic need for an economy.
So, what do we even mean by an economy? Well, at its heart, it's just a system for making and trading stuff that has value. And that basic idea is true whether you're a muggle or a wizard. Food still has to be grown, wands have to be carefully crafted by experts like Ollivander, and the people who do that work, well, they expect to get paid for it.
And what's really fascinating about this list is just how normal it all looks. The wizarding world has its own money, a central bank run by goblins, all those shops in Diagon Alley, and a clear job market. This whole structure means that goods and services are not free. And just like in our world, it creates distinct social classes, from the super wealthy Malfoys all the way down to the struggling Weasleys. This economic reality is the first major piece of our puzzle.
But having a familiar economy doesn't quite explain everything we see. And that brings us to our second clue. Magic itself isn't limitless. There are actual rules, hardwired restrictions on what magic can and cannot do, and those rules have huge consequences for who gets what. This quote from Hermione is absolutely key. She's explaining something called Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration, which is basically a law of magical physics. And what's the number one exception? Food. You just can't create it from nothing. This one rule changes everything. It means scarcity is a real thing in their world, and if you can't just conjure a meal, then hunger is also very, very real.
Now I know what you're thinking. Why not just multiply the food you already have? And that's a great question. You can magically increase food, but it's not a perfect fix. The theory that makes the most sense is that every time you magically duplicate food, it degrades a little. So sure, you might be able to stretch a meal, but you can't rely on it to create an endless, healthy food supply. All right, so if food is off the table, what about money? Well, it's a pretty safe bet that another of Gamp's big exceptions is real gold. I mean, think about it. If wizards could just conjure galleons out of thin air, that entire economic system we just talked about would completely fall apart. Poverty wouldn't be a circumstance, it would be a choice. And here we have the perfect proof. The Lestrange vault at Gringotts has that nasty curse where everything multiplies when you touch it, but Griphook himself confirms that all the copies are worthless. This shows that wizards can imitate wealth, but they cannot create real value out of thin air. It just reinforces that, like food, true wealth is a limited resource. So, we figured out that magic has limits, and we know the wizarding economy is real. But even with all that, it just doesn't feel like the complete picture. What if the deepest, most difficult cause of poverty in the wizarding world has nothing to do with magic at all? And this brings us to our third and final clue. The biggest barriers in the wizarding world are often social, not magical. It's a society that's dealing with prejudice and systemic problems that, as we're about to see, no spell could ever fix. Let's go back to Remus Lupin for a second.
The guy was intelligent, talented, and an incredibly powerful wizard. His poverty had nothing to do with a lack of skill. It was because he was a werewolf. The social stigma, the fear, it made it almost impossible for him to hold down a steady job. His problem wasn't a magical one, it was a societal one.
And Lupin's story, it just shines a spotlight on a much bigger issue. Prejudice, whether it's against werewolves or house elves or muggleborns, creates very real economic barriers. These kinds of social problems, a lack of opportunity, unequal access, being excluded, these are the real roots of poverty, and they are completely immune to magic.
Okay, so we have all of our clues. We've got a real economy, we've got magical limits, and we have deep social prejudice. It's time to put all the pieces together and finally solve the poverty paradox.
This table really sums it all up. You see, wizarding poverty isn't caused by just one thing. Hunger exists because you can't magically create food and because some people simply can't afford to buy it. A lack of wealth is caused by not being able to conjure gold and by social prejudice that locks people like Lupin out of good jobs. It's this messy intersection of magical law and human reality.
So here is the most important takeaway. Magic is an incredible tool for convenience. It saves time, it reduces labor, it makes day-to-day life way easier. But convenience is not the same thing as equality. Magic is great at managing the resources you already have, but it can't create endless abundance, and it absolutely cannot fix deep-seated social injustice. And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. We know for a fact that magic can make life easier in 1,000 different ways. But when the most fundamental problems are things like inequality, prejudice, and a lack of opportunity, well, the evidence from the wizarding world seems pretty clear. No amount of magic can ever make life truly fair.